future.
I feel a bit weird making this video, because I tended to make more analysis vlogs after my general video on world building, but I just can't let this go. In other words, this video is more for my own sanity than anything else. After watching season 1 of Carnival Row, I believe it was a flawed but okay season that I could recommend to my viewers. But while writing the script and rewatching the first season, I realized the writers managed to do something that's both brilliant and horrible at the same time. I mean that in the sense that it seems the writers have something to say, but on further inspection, there's just nothing here. Let's just get this underway. Carnival Row is a new series on Amazon Prime. It's a high concept setting with the premise that a human city-state is overwhelmed by an influx of non-human refugees from the mythical islands. So it's effectively Alien Nation but with fantasy creatures instead of aliens. The Republic of the Borgs lost an overseas war with the Pact that apparently has started a campaign of genocide in these islands. For reasons. Now the humans have to live together with the fairies called the Fae, Faun, Kobold, Trolls, Centaurs, just to name a few races. And with all living together, I mean the humans treat them as second-class citizens and a source of cheap labor. So of course the humans hate them, for reasons that are not really clarified. And it's this lack of explanations that annoy me the most about this first season. Everything is implied and left open for interpretation, yet it is very clear what mindset the writers expect their audience to have while going into this series. In the hour runtime of the first episode alone, there are 10 minutes dedicated to the actual murder mystery. The rest is either people being angry, being oppressed, or humans being assholes to non-humans. The only time we see humans and non-humans really fraternize is with prostitutes. This approach to writing isn't new, of course. It's like Christploitation, where the creators expect their audience to be hardcore Christians. However, these writers also believe that all hardcore Christians believe as they do. And they're often very wrong, causing their intended audience to turn on their creation regardless. Considering the context of today's media landscape, I expected Carnival Row to do well with critics of a particular slant. But I too was wrong. Even they slammed it for being overbearing and unfocused like its predecessor Bright that tried the same concept in a modern day LA. But there it are just the orcs who represent the oppressed. In both Bright and Carnival Row, the creators attempted to be so progressive it turned out to be really regressive instead. Gee, who thought that using orcs as a metaphor for black culture would not go over well? Fortunately, Carnival Row is not as bad as Bright. Unlike Bright, the plot is okay and its characters don't act like morons. In matter of fact, they're very smart. A bit too smart. And not in the sense they are Mary or Gary Stews, in the sense they are leaves on the wind, going wherever the plot needs them. The only characters that have actual agency and develop their characters are the villains of the series, who definitely stand apart from the protagonists who barely do anything from chasing plot points and act oppressed. The series also has the Star Wars prequel problems that it wants to be too much. It wants to be a murder mystery, a forbidden romance, a high concept fantasy, and a commentary on bigotry. I'm not saying you can combine these themes, but you need to prioritize one. Unfortunately, they didn't do this, turning it into a unfocused mess. The plotline makes sense, but it's glued together by coincidences and the characters are just drawing sudden conclusions. Not to mention all the developments and plotlines that go nowhere. I wonder if this is because the various episodes have different directors, who I know can make great television, but they just didn't know what to do with all the disjointed plotlines. But this video is on world building, not the story or character, so let's continue with the themes and its message. What are they? After watching the first episode for the first time, I thought this Sagatort metaphors was meant to tell us something, as if the creators believed they had something clever to say. But they fooled me. The series, just as Bright, is presented as a metaphor for race relations in the West. It is the reason I avoided Bright in the first place, because the folks that present their fiction in this way tend to be as subtle as an elephant in a porcelain shop regarding these topics. And boy, Bright and Carnival Row do not disappoint in that regard. It is one of those shows that presents you with a complex subject in a way you're not able to think about it. People get immersed in a show when they can relate to a character, when they undergo hardships, etc. Or by being presented a problem where there's no obvious answer and both parties involved with the conflict are correct in their own way. For example, Team Jacob and Team Edwards. Yeah, lowbrow, I know, but the point is that our fans are involved in this discussion because the fandom is not clear-cut who Bella should shag. You can moan about the Twilight series all you want, but at least it understands its target audience. The main problem with Carnival Row is how it presents its main themes and central conflict. Nearly no one in the audience is pro-racism. So when one side is in favor of discrimination and the other isn't, guess what side they pick. Now first I thought that the writers were going after a particular audience with this show, but while peering through my notes while writing this, I may have been wrong. I don't say this because I hate the first season. Matter of fact, there is great potential here, but it had to make room for the themes of the story. So a lot of stuff that could and should have been explained is only hinted at. I guess we just have to wait for season 2 for the explanation, huh? But before we go on, let me explain what I mean with world building. The general conception of world building is that it is the crafting of a believable world with many concepts to explore. And in that regard, Carnival Row shines. But in fiction, it's only part of what world building actually is. It is one thing to make a world, it's something else to communicate it to the audience. Carnival Row doesn't necessarily fail in this regard, but it does fall way short. I love the series when it explores its fantastical elements. The magic, the centaur cab drivers, the kobold performances. I think these are great moments, but these are sandwiched in between the topics the creators cared about more. In my video, in Too Close to the Sun, I talked about the inclusion of Nikola Tesla and how they used him as a narrative shortcut, assuming the audience knows who he is and about his rivalry with Edison. And considering the target demographic, they would be right. However, they did not do this to speculate about what an alternate version of Tesla would be like. You know, the entire point of speculative fiction? They used this name simply to invoke the idea of Tesla and make it appear there's more to their stories than there actually is. Carnival Row is no different. It uses real-world problems as a narrative shortcut. For example, the Church of the Martyr is a metaphor for Christianity, but instead of Jesus on the cross, we have a guy that has been hung. And that's about all we learn of the religion. And this is what the writers believed that is all they needed to do. Because their target audience is presumably atheist and presumably has certain biases towards Christianity, or organized religion in general. Thus they project their biases onto the show. And this is not the only example where the writers do this. All the named factions within the show seem to be metaphors for real-world religions or ideologies. If this lack of creativity wasn't the case, and this is supposed to be an actual, fictional, fleshed-out religion, all we learn about it is gays are bad, magic is bad, and other religions are bad. Most viewers of the show would not question it right away because, well, religion, am I right? And that is what is secretly brilliant about it. You don't question it right away. And that's how the show got away with a lot during my first viewing of the season. Meanwhile, none of the important things about a religion are ever mentioned. Who is this martyr? What's the religious importance of his martyrdom? What does this religion have to say of indentured servitude? Would that make the citizens of the burg hypocrites? Are there worshipping factions that openly oppose the non-humans or try to help them because of their fate? None of this is explored. And religion is just one thing, but also the topic of bigotry here is treated as cartoon villainy and shown to us in scenes very reminiscent of Monty Python sketches.
Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
And that's not just the humans, by the way. The Fae, Lives Matter Mafia and the Jihadi Fun are no better off. They're all goddamn caricatures. This whole screenplay feels like a second draft where they fleshed out the main story and the villains, but everything else still needed to be refined to tie the subplots and themes together. But somewhere the writers just gave up and handed the creators an unpolished script. They showed the rich want to appear more progressive than their cartoonishly violent lower classes, but then the show just forgets about it. Every time I think oh, this is actually getting pretty good. It changes to a completely different plot line and we don't see the characters for another 2 episodes. That is just how unfocused this series is. It, for example, gets mentioned that humans are losing their jobs to non-humans, but we never get to see it. And it happens a lot where characters start talking about a certain subject and then it's just dropped, never to be seen or heard of again. Why don't we see a group of human workers complaining they lost their jobs and cannot support their families? That way they could actually show us the problem of income and race relations. But no, instead we get boring scenes where humans are either bitching about or being mean to non-humans. The same goes for the character of Agrus Astrion. He is just a successful pawn that wants to be accepted by the elite. Why is not really clarified, but again his entire role is to be the successful oppressed person. and we only get to see him from Spurnroy's point of view. The only time we see the world from his perspective is when he talks about his romantic relationship with Spurnrose, and that's about the extent of his character, which is a damn shame, because I really like him when he shows his fangs. And that is what I mean with unfocused. This character could have had a series on its own, but instead it's just another shorthand to support the themes. This plot doesn't even lead to anything this season. Guess we're gonna have to wait for season 2! Stranger Things gone downhill after season 1, but at least the plotlines get resolved by the end of each season. Astraeon could have been a juxtapose to the young Fawn who gets radicalized by religious fanatics. Because religion, am I right? Anyway, we could have seen how Astraeon attempts to integrate with society while other Fawn radicalize. Instead, we get to see how this Fawn fuck-up is converted by nothing more but a bowl of soup and a summary of Fawn Kampf, because fuck it. It just boggles me how writers are trying to push progressive values by using negative stereotypes. Also, did I mention their god is supposed to be faceless? Yeah... Really, series, jihadi fawn and black ravens who want to stick it to the police? Are all these names and weird events weird coincidences that relate to real-world radicals? Or does this prove my point that this series is written on autopilot? So, we need something to radicalize the fake group. Like something like the Black Panther. Yeah, exactly like those guys. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we could call them something like the Dragonflies or Who Wants to Be an Insect? Didn't one of the directors of the show make the Tick? Oh, whatever. Just call them the Black Ravens. Okay. Well, that seems a bit random. But maybe we could make it a reference to their religion. Well, we'll save it for season 2. Anyway, we don't even learn how Astraeon earns his wealth. It is implied, however.
Tell me, what does a skipjack do exactly?
Well, a skipjack is one who tracks workers that have run away.
Yes, he was a fawn that hunted down other non-humans for the man. Did he get wealthy this way? Well, for some reason the writers decided to be really sketchy about that, even when Astraeon is asked directly. I wonder why. These Uncle Tom-esque characters are starting to become a trope, I noticed, and it's fucking nasty. If a human in this series would end up saying he was a bounty hunter, nobody would even bat an eye. But in series like Penny Dreadful, we now have these black characters who hunted down other black slaves. And it's always treated as a dirty secret, something they should not do, no matter what. I mean, the show doesn't outright say it. A matter of fact, they may have even done so with the best in intentions to give the subject more nuance. But here's the thing, even in social experiments, traitors are labeled as the most loathed of people. It are people who ratted out the resistance fighters to the oppressive regime, or girls who fell in love with enemy soldiers. The majority of people believe that traitors have to undergo the consequences. This is why the guilt by association fallacy is so often used to undermine one's opponent. Looking remotely like or agreeing with one's enemy is enough to deem one untrustworthy. The racial connotation given to these characters make it even worse, because it assumes that a member of a certain ethnicity needs to be loyal to that ethnicity for no good reason. And again, it may not say it outright, but it is heavily implied in public discourse. Your ears may not hear it, but your brain does. And now writers seem to think that this is a good way to give a character of a certain ethnicity depth, while invoking images of racial stereotypes inside our minds. How progressive of them. Look, I don't like reading so deep into things, but I want to kill this type of trope before it becomes the norm. Also, this is the only stated flaw Astraeon is given in the show. They could have chosen so many things, like he was a thief, a pirate, a ruthless businessman who used non-humans as wage slaves, but they turned him into a skipjack. It doesn't help that he responds with,
If I was to find my way in the world of men, I'd have to play by the rules of men.
And fuck, there's a lot to unpack in that statement. And that's because of how the show is written. It is hard to separate the character from real-world people that believe certain members of certain groups can do no wrong or are morally superior to others. Does Astraeon really believe that? Or did the Fawn just used to live in a type of utopia where no one prosecuted one another? I don't know, maybe they really were too occupied with flogging themselves all day. I tried to look for more information on the official fandom, but it is barren as it can be. The island of Pion, where the Fawn come from, doesn't even have a stop article. All we learn is this comment by Astraeon.
I mean, you could go months there without encountering anyone that wasn't a puck. Not a trow or a pix in sight, much less a man. And I can assure you that no one there gives even the slightest thought towards creating a more inclusive society.
To come back to Astraeon, his role as a skipjack is put front and center of his entry, which I think says a lot on how his character is generally perceived. And this is not the fault of the fans, this is the fault of the writers for outright refusing to explain anything. Despite all the effort put into these fantastical races, we learn barely anything about them, besides that they are needed to support the oppression narrative of the show. It creates the same problem I have with Star Trek, where most races are reduced to stereotypes. Yet Star Trek talked about many of the same topics as Carnival Row and did it so much better. Not always, but fuck Deep Space Nine did this well, and they didn't need shorthands to do so either, until they decided to retcon their own intentions 10 years later. All we learn about the Fae is that they have a matriarchal polytheistic society. Did all of them get along all the time? Well, obviously they didn't. We know their castle existed long before the humans came, because the library was there. What about the fun? Didn't they have any internal conflicts? Are these groups still fighting each other in the Republic? How would that affect civil life in the city-state? How do these groups interact with each other besides humans acting like complete bellends? Are there no groups that try to build bridges or advocate for non-human rights? Well, the Regent kinda does. It's not really explained why. How long do the Fae live in the Burg exec? Fuck. I'm gonna stop here. I think I made my point. Again, I liked Carnival Row, but the show is utterly forgettable apart from its aesthetics. I see why people like it. It's for the same reason I wanted to like it. Its strength is its unique world and fantasy elements, but the creators don't use that to their advantage. If they continue this in the second season, this show will be utterly forgotten within 2 years. Considering they ended their show on the creation of what resembles a World War II ghetto, because of course, I'm rather pessimistic. Conclusion, Carnival Row is wasted potential. Not so much for its attempt at a progressive message, because quite frankly I have no idea what we're trying to say. It has no focus and the directors were clueless on what they were supposed to go for. Technically and visually the show looks great and the actors give a good performance when they are given something to work with, like in the few last episodes. Now, will I watch the second season? Yeah, probably, but only after rewatching Alien Nation, the new seasons of The Boys, Umbrella Academy, The Expanse, Altered Carbon, and well, you get the idea. And well, that's the end of this video. The reason I am so annoyed by this season is because it was such a great and good looking concept that is wasted. Kinda out of frustration, I wrote a suggestion on how I believe this could have been improved, but I wasn't sure I should include it. So I asked my viewers if they would be interested, and they did. But first let me thank my patrons on Subscribestar, Mr. JB Spender and Steamy Wonders, and Bowlerhead Tom. Welcome to the club. If you enjoyed my commentary on the show, don't forget to give this video a like and share it with your friends. And with no further ado, here's my proposal for Carnival Row. The point of this suggestion is to solve two of the major issues this show has. The first one is its lack of focus. The second is that the show does not really show any of the problems that the city has. So I would have the season begin with Rycroft Philostrate, the inspector character, organizing a raid on an elixir production facility. We meet the police and as they prepare they talk about how these criminals are flooding the city with a drug that is more addictive than crack or heroin. We also see a number of elixir addicts skulking around in the streets, who are human and non-human alike. Maybe the drugs is like crocodile and it destroys the user's bodies if used regularly, visualizing the problem for the audience. Then the actual raid starts and we find a drug den run by the Fae Black Ravens. But what should have been a clean arrest ends up in a full-out fight. This can be because the inspector is personally involved in this because he lost a colleague to the drug, possibly to an overdose. Either way, he should act unprofessionally because he has a severe bias towards the Fae. Then it turns out that one of the Fae controls a weak Dark Escher and uses it on the cops who barely manage to defeat it. While they fight the inspector, they catch a glimpse of Vignette Stonemas as he escapes, and it may include a quick flashback hinting to his past as a soldier in Tirnanoke and her past relationships with this particular Fae. But instead of him leaving her in the war to create pointless drama, instead he feels betrayed by her for whatever reason. Meanwhile, Vignette does not reveal herself because, well, apart from the obvious reasons, because of the guilt she feels for betraying him all those years ago. After the war, she joined the Ravens because back then the Ravens intended to go back to Tirnanoke and fight the Pact once again. However, their ideals got lost around the way, and now their primary concern is the drug trade. But it's possible that the revenue is still used to support rebels overseas. Now the situation in the city has been set up. Just as in the series, the singer gets murdered, presumably by a Dark Escher, and immediately everyone blames it on the Fae, causing a media riot. Not realizing this woman is his mother, Raycroft doesn't give a damn about the Fae that got murdered, but the Dark Escher might lead him to the Dark Ravens and help him deal with the elixir epidemic. This gives Philostrate proper motivations and flaws. He will need to overcome his own biases in order to realize none of the Fae had anything to do with the murders, and of course deal with his own heritage when it is revealed he himself is a half-Fae. This of course also means that his Fae heritage was hidden from him his entire life, which would also bring him in conflict with the future murder victims who hid this from him. This resentment towards them could also lead to their eventual murders, because he refuses to protect them or listen to their advice. After the murder of the singer and the media backlash, we go to the politicians. They're arguing about the elixir epidemic and the use of magic, hinting that something should be done about the Faiish problem. One side can blame it on the other side allowing the refugees to come in, and the other side can retort by saying it is their fault for losing the war in the first place. Then a third party could come up and be the voice of reason, and that the problem should be solved in the here and now and actually make a proper proposition. A well-intended proposition, but puts the plot in the realm of unintended terrible consequences. This puts the central problem in a narrowed-down framework that actually presents us with a problem. You can't ask the audience to be pro or anti-racism. That is dumb. However, you can present the audience with a problem to which there's no clear or obvious answer, and could make them think what they would have done in the politician's place instead. We can expand on this topic for all characters. For example, Spurn Rose could be a volunteer at a martyr drug clinic, helping humans to recover from elixir addiction, giving the audience a reason to like her. But while she is helping a new patient, it is revealed the patient has hooves, indicating he's a mixed breed, and she sends him away, explaining that they only help humans. Maybe a Fawn Temple will help, but probably not. Maybe you could even throw in some stuff that he was a lost cause anyway because recovery rates for Fawn are atrocious. Remember the radicalized Fawn? Instead of converting him with a bowl of soup and a napkin, instead he falls on hard times and works a terrible job. Maybe the factory owner pays his Fawn employees with elixir to either motivate them or make them stronger. Of course, the drug destroys him and he is about to collapse when a follower of the faceless god appears. They help him recover and make him clean, and instead of self-flagellation, he, ironically, takes mushrooms from the homeland that gives him illusion to confront himself and make him stronger and more focused than ever before. He makes a full recovery and finds new purpose in his faith, but something is nagging at him. Everywhere he sees aimless Fawn, high on elixir. Something needs to be done about the scourge that hits the Fawn the hardest of all. Something very drastic. It's also very obvious that the police and administrators have no desire to do something about the problem. And if they don't help, it means that Fawn need to help themselves. But instead of making him assassinate the regent, I would make the faceless followers go on a rampage against the Ravens instead. To the population of Carnival Row, this might look like a good thing at first, however it soon escalates in a full-out gang war. Even for outsiders, this gang war is running out of hand. It doesn't help that the Ravens use humans for drug pushers, because they don't get stopped by the police as often. However, the attacks on the human dealers can be used by the opposition as an excuse to send in the army to deal with the problem and quarantine Carnival Row. The Regent reluctantly agrees to this under the condition that some other races are still free to leave the Row. This could create even more resentment among the non-humans. Maybe this particular plot can be juxtaposed to that of Agrius Estraeon, who moves in next to the Spurn Roses. Spurn Rose can still be disgusted by his presence, but maybe she needs money to keep the drug clinic open and asks Estraeon to get a loan or a donation. Both out of respect for her work and the irony that a human is in need of a Fawn's money, he makes a donation on the condition that non-humans are allowed in as well. He does so more out of self-indulgence and out of a sense of empathy, but he'll claim differently in public. Now let's for the hell include the love plot, and after the opening of the clinic, when Spurnrose is naked in his bedroom, somebody enters Straeon's estate. It's a Fae that flew in, and starts the conversation with, "Well, good evening, Captain. Think we couldn't find ya? It's hard to hide with your photo all across the front page. So what's the big idea? Trying to cure your former clients?" I think you can imagine Spurnrose's reaction when she hears this. So yeah, this proposition is a bit single-minded on the extra stuff, but it connects the characters and provides us with a simple framework in which we can base our themes, ranging from the race relations, immigration, prejudice, addiction, and prosecution. And one of my favorite themes that's severely lacking in this series, redemption. It also juxtaposes the character who attempt to unite the population against those who divide it, intentionally or not. I realize the original protagonist and the murder mystery are barely included in this, but it's the main problem with the series to begin with. It wants to be too much. Something needs to go. And more importantly, these themes are intended not only to make you empathize with these characters while they struggle with their inner turmoil, they should also make you think on how you would act in a similar situation where there are no right answers. Someone has to suffer to come to a solution that is most agreeable to society. So let me know if you think this is an improvement on the original script and if it helped you in your own writing endeavors.